Hi, my name is Amanda Parris. I'm the creator, executive producer, and host of For the Culture with Amanda Parris. For the Culture with Amanda Parris is about exploring different topics that center Blackness and Black folks, topics that are often in the group chat or trending on social media. But in this show, we take the conversation away from online platforms and into the real world, going to where the stories are. It's a travel show. It's a deep dive into conversations that often don't get the kind of space and time to get that deep dive. And I hope that you tune in because it's a chance to explore conversations across Black diasporas around the world, which we so rarely get to do.
My name is Amanda Parris. I'm a frontline community worker turned writer, producer, and TV host. And I am constantly thinking about culture, race, and social issues.
When African Americans do depictions of Caribbean people and the accents are terrible.
For me, it's disrespectful.
To me, that's racist.
The idea that gave birth to this series, it wasn't a singular idea. There's a lot of different topics that I was just writing down and wishing that I had the platform, the space to dive deeply into them in a way that I hadn't seen on screen before. So frequently when there are documentaries or docuseries or news stories about Black communities, it's very local. So it's focused on like the Black Canadian community or Black New Yorkers or Black British folks. And because I am somebody who was born in the UK, moved to Canada at a certain age, devours mostly American pop culture, but also come from a very Caribbean cultural heritage, I don't feel locked into one geographical space. My references cross many different borders, and I was eager to see these conversations happen in that way, across borders, across geographical spaces. And so I started, just kind of jotting down ideas for topics that I wish had that space to engage in that conversation. So things like Black maternal health, things like reparations, education, so different topics. And I decided to pitch this as a show idea, and luckily other people thought it was interesting too, and we got a chance to make it. The reason we decided to take an international route in telling this story, there's a couple of reasons. The first is very selfish. As a host, I've had the privilege to host a number of different television shows, from The Vaults, CBC Arts, Exhibitionists, The Filmmakers, but what all those shows share in common is that I hosted them from within a studio. There were rare occasions where I got to leave the studio and go out into the world and interview people in spaces that were significant to the story, and I could always feel the difference when that happened. It's such a powerful thing to meet people where they are comfortable as opposed to asking them to come into a space, and so I wanted to do more of that. The second reason, or that we wanted to take an international route, is I'm a huge fan of travel shows. I loved Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown so much. There are so many different food shows that I love watching because it gives you a sense that you're on a journey with the presenter or the host, or with that show as well too. You get a glimpse into another world, and I wanted a chance to do that type of work as well. In terms of why we chose those specific locations, part of it was also selfish. I wanted to start with the places that reference me and my identity first. So Canada, obviously, being the home, we're gonna start here. The UK is the place where I was born and lived the first 10 years of my life, and I feel a real connection to Black British culture and identity, and so that was one of the locations. And then I really, really wanted to explore Black communities outside of the United States and the UK and Canada. I wanted to explore what Blackness looks like in the Caribbean in particular, which is a region that I feel like I so rarely get to see on screen, and when I do, it's almost always Jamaica. And so I really wanted to give the small islands a moment. Grenada is the island where my mom's side of the country was from, and so we had direct contacts, and it was easy to start thinking about that as a space. And then when we were thinking about our episode on reparations, it only made sense to go to Barbados. They're the island that's really leading the charge in that regard. We went to France, to Paris, because the story took us there. I wish we could have done way more. There's such a huge Black community in Paris, and I would actually love if we got another season to return and do way more in France, not just in Paris, but beyond. And I think there's so many other places that I have on my wish list if we got a season 2. I feel like there are so many stories in Black communities that so rarely get seen on our screens. And as grateful as I am to all the pop culture that exists and that has helped to define me, I want to go beyond that in future seasons as well. In terms of the selection of topics, it really was about thinking about what are the topics that my friends and I talk about in the group chat. Literally, that was like the dynamic and the starting point. For example, the business of Black hair. Black hair is a topic that has been explored and investigated multiple times in documentaries and documentary series. But the one thing that I so rarely get to engage in, and a topic that often dominated my group chats, was the money behind the business. So less about our connection and our identity when it comes to hair, which I feel like has been really dealt with in beautiful ways by other filmmakers and creators. I really wanted to get into the conversation around who is making money in this industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that mostly Black women are the ones investing their dollars and their pounds into, but it is rarely Black women who are the ones that are profiting from it. And so I wanted to do a deep dive into that topic, not because it was a personal story, but more so an intellectual sort of curious engagement.
It is a Black-owned product, and I want it to remain that way.
If somebody comes and offers you $10 million, sis, run, okay?
There are other topics that were much more personally inspired. So the Black maternal health episode was inspired by my experience in 2020, being pregnant and giving birth to my son, and having to go through the healthcare system, knowing that it's been documented that there is a Black maternal health crisis happening in the United States and in the United Kingdom, and that Canada across the board refuses to track race-based data. And so we don't have evidence to state whether or not there is a Black maternal health crisis here, except for the fact that Black front care health providers frequently are stating that there is one here and that they're seeing it in their day-to-day cases. And also, based on my own experience, I saw a lot of the things that were talked about in those reports in the UK and the US happening to me personally. And so I wanted to do a deep dive into that topic from a little bit more of a local perspective.
This fear washed over me. I'm in pain. This is my first delivery. No one's even believing that I'm still in pain.
The education episode was also very personally driven. I spent almost a decade as a community organizer and an activist working around alternative education. I know a lot about the school system and maybe too much. And now I have a son who has to go into the school system, and I'm very nervous about it. And so I wanted to again, think about how Black communities have dealt with the fact that these school systems, whether we're talking about the US, the UK, or Canada, have very different setups and are organized differently, but have the same outcomes for Black students, and how Black communities have dealt with that reality. So, these topics were sometimes very personally inspired, sometimes more of an intellectual curiosity, but either way, they were all things that I talk about with my friends, that I sometimes see trending on social media, that will every now and again get a report done in the news, but rarely do they get that deep dive that I was hungry for. We wanted to have these sort of roundtable conversations in almost every single episode, and for this particular episode, we really wanted it to be a conversation between folks that don't already know each other, who are cultural leaders in their own rights, and I feel like one of the easiest ways to get people feeling comfortable who don't know each other is by inviting them to have a meal together, and doing it over food and drink always, I think in so many cultures and communities, really breaks the ice and allows people to get comfortable. So we started looking for a venue. The producer for this episode found a number of different restaurants in London. Obviously, London is overflowing with restaurants. We were particularly looking for restaurants that had cuisine that was connected to the topic. Papa L's was an amazing space, and the chef who you see there was so welcoming and so wonderful. And it hadn't necessarily been part of the plan necessarily to film him making the food, but the food was so good. And the menu that he offered was so good. We were like, oh, let's see him, kind of craft this as well too. I think that any opportunity we could get to make it feel like we were in a natural conversation, in a natural space, and just let the conversation flow, we did. This particular space, this round table conversation was so rich and filled with so many gems and so many nuggets. It just made sense to use it as a place that we kept returning to throughout the episode. That was the idea off the top, and it totally worked in the edit. The folks that we brought together for this, Daniel, Bolu, Mohammed, are just so brilliant and brought a lot of texture and thoughtfulness. And we started off our conversation with some shots, which I think also helped make everyone a little bit comfortable. And then just eating. I mean, I feel like production-wise, it's so hard to film a food scene, a dinner scene, because continuity issues, sounds of like forks clanking, people chewing and talking with their mouth full. So it definitely annoyed one of my senior producer, and she was like, can we not do that again? But I personally love it so much and would love to do way more scenes where we're just talking over food and just in as natural a space as possible. This was a really unique part of our production. Jab Moses is someone I've known for a few years. He's an artist and performer and sort of a cultural archivist in a way, but as somebody who just like really believes in Jab culture and literally goes into performance mode and is adorned in like the oil all year long in some cases. Like, he doesn't just do it for carnival. He is somebody who will just go out in the streets and just really become that character. And so when we were in Grenada and we were filming this episode, I realized pretty quickly that we were missing something crucial, which was like a local voice to talk about the tensions that happen when people return to Black spaces. And so he was one of the folks that I thought of to call up and see if he would be open to being interviewed. And he was, and then we were like, well, it might be really cool to also incorporate this aspect of who he is, not realizing how well it would tie into a larger piece that came out in this episode of this idea of the Black space. We kind of did it really early, not sure exactly how we were going to use it, and it ended up being incredible. So he came with all of the tools that he needed, necessary, and we kind of just left him to it. We played some music. It was very early morning on the beach, like before it got busy, before the sun got too hot. And he just started, covering himself in the oil. He, before this, he had talked through the history and through the culture and through the tradition and the different steps and all the different materials necessary. And then he just went into this zone and became the character. And it was really incredible. As I said, we hired local crew when we go. So we hired local Grenadian filmmakers who are very familiar with this culture and kind of shot it in such a beautiful way that I think really captured the details of it and the essence of it in a way that I really appreciate it, as well as our own DOP that day, Lucius Deshose, who's so talented. So yeah, I'm really happy with it. And then when he was done, I was like, I know that after Juve, everyone goes to the ocean to wash off the oil, and I was like, maybe we can end it that way with you going out into the ocean and washing it all off. And it just, as soon as we filmed it and he was doing it, we were like, oh yeah, this is it. Like, this is what we've been looking for, and this is what we've been seeking, and this will be such a key visual moment for the entire series. In terms of the amount of time it took to develop each episode, we filmed everything simultaneously and also edited 6 episodes simultaneously, which I don't know if I'd ever recommend again. So we started with hair. That was the first shoot and sort of one of the first episodes to really be cast and to get most of the production done. But it's hard for me to lock in the exact time frame. I can tell you that we spent 6 months filming for the show, and we started with hair, and our final shoot was, I think, for Glass Cliff. I could have that wrong. But yeah, and so throughout that 6 months, we were filming. We didn't do them in order. We filmed them simultaneously because we would go to London and film for multiple episodes in London, or we would go to New York and film multiple things in there. So yeah, it was a very jam-packed 6 months where we had to just be on point and thinking across episodes the entire time. So, just major shout out to my production team who worked so hard, like incredibly hard, to gather enough content for 6 full-length documentaries in 6 months. The process for casting the episodes was really layered. We did a lot of research before we began filming and just tried to find the right voices. We knew that we didn't want to be expert heavy, but we thought at least starting to figure out who are the experts in this field would be a good starting ground. And then from there, trying to find people who are on the front lines of whatever topic it was. In some cases, we did open call-outs. So for our Black maternal health episode, we really wanted to talk to a lot of different birthing folks who had recently given birth or were pregnant. And so we did open call-outs for those sessions. Sometimes we would do an interview, and while talking to that person, we would get a recommendation for another person. So one really great example of that is we were doing an interview with Renee Gadar for our Business of Black Hair episode. She's the Global Artistic Director of Texture at Aveda Institute. And I was telling her about the entire series, and I started mentioning our education episode, and she was like, you have to interview this individual named Key, an incredible educator who started an organization called Woke Kindergarten, and that was how we got in touch with Key, and they were awesome. So that happened a lot where we, one person would lead us to the next person, lead to the next person. Our interview with Esther Stanford Jose for our reparations episode opened up a whole new frame of thinking about reparations and the direction that we needed to take. And so a lot of it felt like kind of peeling an onion. Each layer would open up another layer and another layer, and that can be a little bit frustrating as a process because you especially when you're working under a broadcaster like the CBC, they're like, when are you going to be done? And we're like, we're not really sure. We kind of have to figure it out. And in some cases, we would do interviews that didn't make it to the final cut. We thought we're going to go in a particular direction, and it just didn't work out, and so we pivoted. So yeah, I feel like the casting process almost went into post to a certain degree because, there were folks that we filmed and that we interviewed that ultimately when we sat down in the edit, we were like, this isn't actually the thing that we had in our mind. It's not actually working out, and this isn't going to work for this particular thing. But the process of interviewing them helped us to get to something else that was still very important for the episode. So yeah, that's my very convoluted answer to that question.
Let's not get too crunk though, because we're on camera.
The initial team, when I started working on the series, was made up of a group of superstar producers who, for the first, I think it was 2 to 3 months, we just spent thinking about the ideas, developing them, and researching them. And I'm so grateful for that period because I think it was important, especially for the first season of our first show, to spend really dreaming without borders about what this could possibly be and coming up with like our no holds barred dream list and starting from there and then figuring out what was actually realistic. So it was a group of producers. They're almost all women of color or Black women, and who are super brilliant and hardworking. And we were able to just not only think about the content of the show, but also sort of the principles of the show, the way that we wanted to work, this idea of having care be a part of the process and how we engaged with folks. We recognized that we were tapping into communities that didn't always have great experiences with media, and often were tapped into in an extractive way for their stories, and we really didn't want to replicate a lot of those unhealthy patterns and practices. And so we talked a lot about the way that we wanted to work as well too. So having that time period was really vital and rich and necessary, and I'm really grateful for that. And then jumping into production, our team expanded to include crew and some more producers. And then later on in post, there was a whole new team that was brought together that included story editors, an animator, colorists, sound recordist. The team just kept evolving and changing, but what was great about it is that with every iteration, we were still able to bring those principles and try to bring those principles and keep them going as well too. When we traveled overseas, we tried to travel with a very small crew. It would only be myself, a producer, and our DOP, and then any other crew that we would need, for example, second camera, sound, we would always hire locally. It was a really great experience to be able to hire locally. It allowed us to meet with folks who know the places that we're going to way better than we know them, to just make really great connections, and also to invest in those local communities and economies in a space like Grenada that doesn't often get a lot of international production going there. It also felt like it was a really great opportunity to see the possibilities of a location that I don't think the CBC has ever been to. And then there were also really great surprises, like going to Barbados. Their systems for hiring local crew and for booking locations was so incredible. It was like way more clear than a place like Paris, for example. So it was also just like great revelations to realize, wow, like this is a really great place that I'd love to return to, because they've really sorted out the systems and the processes and the sort of like administrative bureaucracy necessary to make this feel really seamless. So yeah, it was great. In terms of securing CBC Gem as the platform that would be airing the show, I've been an employee at the CBC for a number of years, and so all my ideas kind of belong to them while I'm an employee. So I pitched the show to them, and so they've been a part of it from the very beginning. They didn't come on later. They came in from the very beginning when I pitched the show to them. I definitely want to give a lot of thanks and gratitude to Jennifer Detman and Sally Cato for being open to hearing that pitch and for supporting the idea once it had been developed further and giving it the green light. And then to my production executive, Gurjana Krupa, my unit manager, Luke Myers, they all sort of really came together to make this idea manifest and make it possible for me to do it. So this is an in-house CBC production, and CBC Gem is their free streaming platform, and that they really wanted to be the home of the show. I think that I've always wanted, in terms of what guided me to this path, I've always wanted to tell stories. That was the first dream that I ever had for myself when I was a kid. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write books, and I would write short stories. I think life can sometimes take you off your path, and so, well-meaning family members sometimes said things that made me feel like that dream wasn't practical or realistic, and so I switched gears and went into other pathways. Like I came to York University as an undergraduate student planning to go to law school. That was the plan for a little while. So it took it took a number of years to come back to the original dream of telling stories. I think so often when we're kids, we know exactly who we are and what we want to do, and then we kind of get pushed out of that. And I don't think it was a mistake, because the life experience that I got doing all of those other things have all filtered into what it is that I'm doing now, and I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, it was always the dream, and I just had to come back to it. I think television was a harder specific dream, because there are so few Black women that I see doing this type of work in Canada. But I'm very grateful to the ones that I did see, like Namugini Kiwanuka, like Tracy Moore, who really made it seem like it was possible, like Trey Anthony, who really kind of set the stage and said, you know what, this can be possible for you. The next big thing, I actually don't know. This is like the first time in a long time that I don't have the next big thing planned. I hope that the next big thing will be a season 2 for this show, but we'll see how it goes. Other than that, I plan on just taking some time to rest and to have a little bit of space. I did Revenge of the Black Best Friend and this show back to back, and I'm pretty exhausted. So for the next couple of months, I'm just planning on taking off and just being a mom and hanging out with my family. And then we'll see.